We appreciate very much the nice turnout we have this morning. I'll greet you all with a good morning and a welcome. This is a very happy day for Paducah and for McCracken County and indeed for the whole surrounding area, because we were handed a challenge and we met it. We were given a golden opportunity and we seized it. We were required to resolve some competing needs and we forged a common solution. Because many different elements of our community, the educational, the medical, the governmental, business and private sectors, combined their efforts, their talents, and their resources, we're able to confirm today that the Allied Health Services building will indeed be a reality. We have gone over the top in our fundraising goal. More on that later. More importantly, I think, is to emphasize how the various segments of our community have worked together to make all of this possible. And it was not an easy task. Let's start at the beginning. Our state government, as you know, is operating under very serious fiscal restraints this year. The task of the legislature when it started, just to continue existing programs and services, was a formidable task. And to come up with any new funds was even more difficult. But Senator Helen Garrett came up with a very creative idea of marrying the needs of two of Paducah's most important institutions, Paducah Community College and West Kentucky Vocational Technical School. It was a novel twist, and it made Paducah and McCracken County stand out in the crowd up there at the legislature. And it caught the eye of the governor, and he was persuaded to include this project in his budget. Now, just keeping it there was a very elusive goal. And had it not been for the vigilant efforts of Representative Albert Jones and Rex Smith and their colleagues, when the bill got into the final hours and got into a conference committee, it could have still felt the budget axe. But because our legislators in both houses worked so well together and worked so diligently, the Allied Health Services building survived the budget process in this, the most difficult of years. Even so, there was still a unique twist. Yes, we had $5.3 million hanging out there, but in order to capture it and make it a reality, we had to raise $336,500 here in this community. This is essentially the amount of the first 6 months of debt service on this project. Now, we were not singled out. We weren't alone in this process. There were a handful of communities across the state whom the legislature asked to demonstrate their need and their desire for such projects by raising some of the funds locally. So let me turn to the fundraising department. I was asked to shepherd that effort, but in fact was really not all that personally involved in the result. Instead, we had this broad-based support of community activity and cooperation that I've alluded to. And that made this not only one of the largest, but frankly, I think the easiest fundraising drive that we've had around here in some time. Now, a good reason for that is that our legislators had fashioned for us an offer we couldn't refuse. I mean, you look at a $5.3 million for $336,000. It wasn't hard to convince people that it was a good investment for our community. Another reason that the drive was successful and so easy is because people in this area are so cooperative. And if I could sound a keynote for the message here this morning, it is a cooperation of the various segments of our community. Western Baptist Hospital kicked off the drive within days of the signing of the legislation. Their chairman, Carl Marquis, here, and Administrator Earl Feeser, and they stepped forward with the first gift of $50,000. Paducah Community College then catapulted the drive along. And we've got their board chairman, Marshall Niemer, and Dr. Clemens here today. And they came up with a magnificent sum of $100,000, really giving the drive momentum. And talk about cooperation between our city and county governments. Representatives from both are here today in full force, and each of them pledged $25,000 to the project. I see Dr. Denny Noonan back there, and he's probably thinking, yeah, Fred, it's easy for you to say how easy this fundraising was and how little work there was. But he was the one that had the most difficult task and the one that required the most legwork. He led the drive among the medical community. Denny, tell us how much you've come up with among the doctors, please.
$58,000.
Let's give him a hand on that. I would like to thank Pat Svingros, who helped me in approaching Paducah Community College, and he worked very closely with Denny Noonan to see how that part of the drive was going. There have been a number of others who saw their civic duty and did it in a very quiet manner. For instance, Crounce Corporation, Martin Marietta, the West Kentucky Construction Association, the Medical Auxiliary, the Propeller Club. All of these people came forward and volunteered their contributions without even being solicited. That's what makes fundraising easy. I'd like to highlight today the contributions which are being announced for the first time. We have the West Kentucky Construction Association, $5,000. Martin Marietta with $9,000. I've mentioned that the city pledged $25,000, the county pledged $25,000, and this fine sum of $58,000 from the medical community. And oh yes, I was able to persuade Paducah newspapers on behalf of the Paducah Sun and WPSD and Hannon Supply to also come up with $25,000. So we're happy to announce that our fundraising drive has exceeded our goal. We have a total not of $336,500, but $353,000. Now, before anybody asks, does that mean do I get part of my money back? The answer is no. We had hoped all along to exceed this goal because this is a special purpose building, and the equipment in it costs more than the normal furniture and fixtures. Therefore, we can use every extra dollar that we get to equip the building. And that means that we're keeping the fundraising drive open. So if any of you come across some people who had intentions and for one reason or other couldn't come up with the cash before today, encourage them to go ahead and make that contribution and assure them that the money will be very, very well spent. Now I'd like to turn to another aspect of this Allied Health Services building that, in my opinion, presented really a much more difficult challenge. And that is the task of picking the site and then allocating the space for this building. You see, both West Kentucky Vocational and PCC have needs that far exceed what is available in this building within this funding. Now that meant that they had to negotiate to see who got how much and where it was going to be put. And there were no guidelines for that negotiation. The legislation was just totally silent on this subject. Didn't even give a hint as how we go about approaching this. The location, think how much more convenient it would be for vocational students to go to their new classes right there on their site. By the same token, the PCC students, look how much easier. They're parked right out here, they're right on the campus. If it were right here, it would be much easier. How do we resolve that? Well, to tackle that problem, an unofficial group of legislators, educators, representatives of the medical community, and some private citizens got together and decided we should form a committee. And there should be on this committee one person appointed by PCC, one by West Kentucky Vocational, one by the mayor, one by the judge, and one by the McCracken County Medical Society. Now, there was nothing in the legislation that dictated this, and as a matter of fact, the citizens group that recommended it had no power to enforce it. It was just something we had to create to make this happen. And it depended entirely on the goodwill and the cooperation and the good judgment of the people involved. Now, the committee first demonstrated its good judgment when it selected Jeff Bostock as its chairman. And I'd like to call on Jeff now to tell you who the other committee members were, to tell you how they went about their work and what their conclusions are. I think he's got perhaps some exciting things to tell you about the building itself. So let me present to you Jeff Bostock.
We do have a nice crowd today, and I'll make my remarks very brief, but what I want to assure every one of you and to reinforce with every one of you is that this community has every right to be standing tall. The pride that we ought to have and feel about this particular building. First of all, the way our legislators were able to assure the funds, assuming that we could raise the money locally. Second, stand proud because of the success of the fundraising campaign and Fred's efforts and all of his support that we got. But thirdly, we ought to be very proud of the local leadership that we have in our education institutions. The committee that I chaired, had the pleasure of chairing, consisted of, first of all, Dr. Roland Myers, who was representing McCracken County Medical District, Dr. Dale Brown representing the mayor, Dr. Sandra Parks representing her institution, Dr. Don Clemens representing his. We had Dr. Ben Carr from the University of Kentucky, and Mr. Gary Grogan, and Ms. Melissa Briscoe from Department of Education. That committee, their role, as Fred told you, was to define the location of that building and to negotiate what the programs were going to be that were going to reside in that building. How were we going to utilize that space? As Fred mentioned to you, each of those institutions were desperately short of space. Their programs were expanding, their enrollments have been expanding. They are desperately short of space. This building was not going to satisfy all of them. In that kind of atmosphere, there was a tendency, a potential for an awful lot of turf protection. Let me assure you that with the leadership from Dr. Clemens and Dr. Sandra Parks, that never occurred. This committee functioned looking at the priorities of the needs of the people and the students of this community. The result is that we now have a functional plan. The architects are working now to do the final design of the building. The site has been located almost equally distant from both institutions. It will sit out here on the highway where it will be visible. The building itself, I believe the total is 63,000 square feet. It is a spectacular building. We got every one of the programs, of the high priority programs, into that building. Now, I talked about the leadership, the real work, people. The real work to do that came from their staffs, from Dr. Parks' staff, from Dr. Clemens' staff. There were two people who did the majority of work and worked hand in glove for their programs. One was Mrs. Lasowski. I believe she's here, Jeannie. She runs the medical programs. And Ms. Barbara Veazey. Is Barbara here today? I don't believe she is. She runs the nursing program for PCC. Both those women did a phenomenal job working hand in hand to lay out that building, and there was never a bit of turf battle or anything else. The result is that we're going to have a allied health center here, which is going to be a model for the rest of the state. And I think, one, because of our legislators, two, because of the fundraising that campaign, and three, because of the working together of these two institutions, we can all stand very proud. Thank you for your time.
I am so proud of this community because when the idea was first brought into fruition, you responded. The two schools responded positively. When we were in session, and I called back to the community for support, You don't just send your public officials to Frankfurt and then forget them. You instantly responded to the rather peculiar needs that we had at that time. You know, it isn't easy to go into a situation where you have diminishing revenue and increasing needs. But that's the situation that public officials find themselves in now, and it is not easy. But we have the opportunity now to educate our people in our community for jobs that are existing at good pay. And what could be more satisfying than that? So I want to thank you, every member of this community, for the response that you gave the legislators when we needed you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Now, if it was her brainchild, I next want to call upon the guardian of this project, because he was there at the 11th hour. And Albert, if you would come up and share with us some of your views on it. Representative Albert Jones.
If I can speak very plainly about what happened in Frankfurt, and just amazing to sit there and believe that we're here today, but I didn't even know anything about an Allied Health building. And I was sick. It was in early '88. And all of a sudden, I was there on the House floor, and Helen comes over there. I'd heard some talk by that time, of course. And she said, the Allied Health building is going down the tubes, or words to that effect. And there was apparently a conference committee of House leadership, Senate leadership, and everything. Of course, she's in the Senate leadership, so she's got some inside knowledge. So she was kind of our spy in there to a certain degree. So she came to me, and I think Rex, is Rex here? I believe.
Rex is out of town.
Is he out of town? Well, he and I were standing there, and she came up to us and said they're in danger, or they're taking it away, or something like that, money. And so Rex and I was trying to change my life at that time. I was, trying to quit cursing and all those kind of things. And so he and I got together with, I forgot who the other legislators were, probably Charles Jividen and maybe 2 or 3 others that we shanghaied that weren't even from this area. And we went to Jody Richards, who is in the House leadership, and we told him in no uncertain terms, if that goes, what we were going to do. I think Rex more than me. Then we proceeded up to the front where the speaker was and called him off of the big platform where he sits and told him what we were going to do and if they did that to us. And so the net effect of the thing is it got restored, and then when it went over to the governor's office, he stayed with it. And that's the way it come back. No two ways about it. Helen Garrett did it. And I don't care what anybody says, if it wasn't for her, if she hadn't come and told us that, it wouldn't be here now. It wouldn't even have gotten over to the governor to make a decision whether he wanted to keep it. And I believe you ought to give credit to that. Also, I think, Denny, your wallet's a little lighter because of Helen, too, but that's all right. Now, the nice thing about this whole thing is that it's a local project. And I firmly believe that if Paducah and McCracken County is going to start making any moves, it's going to have to be done locally. I think the state can give you some aid, but I think that you've got to start right here, and that's where it started. And I think you've got to have people that's got the vision, that's got the ideas to come up with these plans and be able to put them into effect. You're going to have better trained people who won't make the mistakes. We're going to have that will then, of course, cause the thing for lowering of rates of malpractice insurance, which is hurting us. Malpractice insurance both for doctors, lawyers, everybody, liability insurance. So all of this type of work and this particular type of building is going to have that effect. And you don't see that unless you can just sit down sometimes in a quiet place and analyze it. So I'm glad to be a part of it, small part of it, but I'm glad it happened, and I think that probably it's going to be a unique experiment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Albert. Albert mentioned State Representative Rex Smith, who wanted very much to be here today. When I called him, he said that he had to be out of town, and I got a call from him yesterday saying that he might be able to be here, but obviously he was not able to. But they all participated in it, and as Albert mentioned, Charles Jeviden, our neighbor, was also an ally. So they all came together and helped to make it happen. I now would like to talk on some, or rather introduce to you some of the beneficiaries and let them tell you what this means to them. And first I'll call upon Dr. Sandra Parks.
The realization of this building is a very personal thing to me. A few years ago, I had an opportunity to work out of state and see post-secondary education offered in a way that was a little bit more effective than I think we try to do it here in the state of Kentucky. And that's where the community college and the technical programs are all in the same institutions. And it allows a lot more flexibility for students with regard to the programs that they come out with, or the degrees that they come out with. So when I came back to the state, I had that in my mind. And when I had an opportunity to come home to West Kentucky to work, I came here and I realized that there were a lot of things in place to see some things happen that was kind of a part of my vision. Also, at the time that I was out of state doing some graduate work, I had a saying that was given to me when times were kind of tough, and it was real simple. It just said, "Ride the horse in the direction it's going." Well, I had an opportunity to get on a really good horse that was already going in the right direction. The West Kentucky School had been built next door to PCC. Mr. Hickson was a part of that. Not always an easy time. That was a tough time when the West Kentucky School was put over there. But that happened, and that, even though it was painful, it was a positive thing. Mr. Houston was appointed as principal over there, and he and Don Clemens appointed an articulation committee of faculty members to start looking at ways that we could cooperate. These things were already in place and already moving. So when Helen came up with the idea of us moving into a building jointly, that was another thing that was just sort of put in place, and all I had to do was cooperate and get to work with it. So all of those things have happened. The the plans are a reality, and we're going to break ground this fall. But the real work is still ahead of us from the standpoint that my community of vocational education is going to have its eyes upon me in terms of what happens and how well we get along. And I know Don's feeling some of the same pressure from his cohorts across the state, because we do have this turf battle between the two groups of people in the state of Kentucky. And a lot of fears on both parts. A lot of the community college people, I hear them say, "You all are just wanting to take us over." And I hear the same thing from the vocational people. So, you know, a lot of them kind of look askance at this whole thing because they're not real sure who's going to take over whom. But I don't see it as anybody taking over anybody. We're going to all work together. Can't say enough thanks to people like Jeff Bostock and Fred Paxton in terms of helping us get along well together. We couldn't have done it if we hadn't had some objective insight ever so often. Appreciate all of you in the community and your part in this. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Next, I'd like to call on Dr. Don Clemens, President of Paducah Community College.
I'd like to start off really where Sandra ended and thank these two gentlemen, Fred, for getting the leadership to begin with, and coordination, and Jeff Bostock, who kept the thing going from the start and finished it up in a very short time. The leadership demonstrated by our legislators, I think, started the thing. Helen Garrett, first of all. But we as recipients want to thank all these people. The students, of course, will be the ones who will gain from it. And Sandra mentioned the cooperation. I think that begins with the foresightedness of the Paducah Junior College Board of Trustees back a number of years ago when they gave the land to the state to be used for hopefully the new vocational school. And we've envisioned this area as an educational park. And I think this probably is a marker between both institutions being in the middle, and I see other buildings along the road. I hope that we have the same leadership of excellence of Helen Garrett and Albert Jones and Rex Smith and people like Fred Paxton and Jeff Bostock to lead the way when the next building comes up. It is an exciting experiment, I think, for all of us in cooperation. We've had a pretty good beginning, and I think the best is yet to come. But I want to thank you all of you here, for the students and the students to come. The nurses, we've taken in 25% more. Both hospitals are pleased with that. They'll be entering this next fall semester, and will increase our freshman class to almost 100. And I think the new programs, as we develop in allied health, will receive more students, and we'll make use of the space. So I guess I'll just echo Sandra's comments that we want to thank you all. Without you, we couldn't have the building. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Don. You know, the fundraising effort was a success, but if any one of our major contributors had not come through, we'd be shy of our goal. And therefore, I particularly want to thank city government, Mayor Montgomery, I see Bob Leeper and P.J. Grumley, and their other two commissioners for that $25,000 contribution, and Judge John Harris, and there's Wayne Lindsay and Danny Orazine and Fred Morgan Jr. We owe a great debt to all of you, and again, we appreciate the spirit in which these funds were contributed. For our final speaker today, I know you'll welcome those words. I would like to ask Dr. John Denny Noonan, to tell you what this means to the medical community. Denny?
I don't have too much to say. I'll just say essentially what I used in appealing to people to contribute to this project. Since I've been here, it's always been a struggle to get people in the different aspects of allied health to stay here. Those kids that sought education would always seek it elsewhere. And we've got smart minds around here, and we need to keep them here. And these people are the greatest asset that we have for quality care in the hospitals. The hospitals benefit and the doctors benefit more than anybody else from this project. And this is the reason that I worked hard at it, and I did a lot of telephone calls, and a lot of people didn't want me calling back, but I did anyway. And I don't think anybody will realize some of the other side effects that will come from it. We'll have more instructors. We're going to have a better institution, and it's going to fulfill everybody's needs much more than we ever expected. And the hospital is not going to have to be crying for nurses and x-ray technicians. We're running with a shortage of x-ray technicians, nurses, and all the other services at both hospitals now, and hopefully this will fill the void. We may not ever have 100%, but we'll still work for it. There's 200,000 nurses short across the United States, and for us to go out and do this, I think is a great thing, and I thank the legislators for the opportunity to go out and make all these friends that I made over the past 2 months. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much to all of you for making this such a happy day of celebration for Paducah, McCracken County, and the whole area. I appreciate very much your coming out. I say to the media here, I'm well aware that we bill this as a press conference, and we are here to answer any questions that you might have. But for our guests who have other things to do, thanks for coming. See you later.